3, the three-part series that we didn't know was a three-part series, is a genius. 2 years ago in Syracuse, we heard police officers talk about post-traumatic stress syndrome while they were on the job and after the job. We know it occurs in both locations. Then last year in Utica, we heard about another group of individuals who have post-traumatic stress syndrome. Some of our students, some of the brave men and women who have served abroad and come back in our classrooms. We heard their message. Now today we're going to hear about some other brave men and women who have served in another place for our state, for our government, for us. Those are correction officers. The brave men and women who have worked there also have discovered, these gentlemen will share today, their story of how this impacted and affected them. I worked in a department. I have to be honest, I don't believe I have this kind of emotional thought or feeling. However, that was a thought I had. The first time, I was a counselor working in corrections. And I would hear about and see things from a distance. And I thought it didn't bother me very much until I attended these gentlemen's group about 2 months ago. And while sitting there, I heard and felt some things that jogged me a little bit and made me aware of some things I was not aware of, just as they will share their story about their lives. But let's give a little introduction to each individual before they begin their story about what they've done and learned. I won't read through all this because you already have their bios here. First, just in no particular order, that's what's on here. Terry Ryan is a licensed mental health counselor and nationally certified school psychologist. He's also a retired school psychologist from the North Country, and that's what we call ourselves up here, the North Country. You know, there's upstate, downstate, we're North Country. Peru Central School, he retired in 2007. Terry will tell you his involvement with these gentlemen, because Terry did not work for the Department of Corrections, but he certainly has been involved in recent times with these gentlemen. The next two folks I had the privilege of working with for some time when I was in. Jeff Ray is a retired lieutenant. He worked in several places. As he indicates, he was born into a corrections family, and he married a daughter of a correction officer. So he certainly has had a lot of involvement in that area. And I knew him when he worked as an assistant watch commander at Clinton Correctional in Dunmore. And our last person, whose name, and I talked about this before and I apologize, is Gary DeCelle. There's an O on the end. Frankly, up this way, we don't have many names with O at the end, mostly E. It's Gary DeCelle. We have more, so it's more other than that. So my apologies. Gary is a retired lieutenant from the Department of Corrections of many years. Started in 1970, so he's got more seniority on General. And I also had the privilege of working with Gary at Clinton Correctional in Dunmore. So Gary, you're going to be opening up?
Yes.
So, and we'll have certainly time for questions and answers after their presentation. And take it away, Gary.
Thank you, John, and I'd like to thank John and the association for having us up here today and to give our story about our life in corrections. And as far as the name's concerned, just a quick one on that one. When I first started in Greenhaven in 1970, they confused my name down there. I had a lot of Italian supervisors, and they saw the E on the end, so I became DeCelle. And I thought, well, you know what, I'm not going to correct that, because if they think I'm Italian and they're Italian, that's going to work out. So I was Gary DeCelle at Greenhaven. And then when I came back up north, I was back to Gary DeCelle. So I'm used to getting my name confused. Anyhow, we're Team Crush. And Team Crush stands for Correctional Retirees United Strong and Helping One Another. We got started, actually, goes back a long time. I've been retired for almost 14 years now. I found out after I retired that I had some issues. I'd start having these nightmares in the middle of the night, and I'd wake up, my heart would be pounding, I was sweating, I didn't know what was going on with me, and it was just absolutely awful. And my wife is here, Kathy. She also works in corrections, recently retired. But I'd wake her up, and she had the ability to calm me down, settle down, and then I'd go back to sleep, and things would be all right in the morning. But it started happening more frequently, and it got worse and worse and worse. And then I started having panic attacks during the day. And I started really getting worried, and to the point where I said to my wife, I think I'm going to need to get some professional help. There's something going on here. And then one time, I actually thought I was having a heart attack, and I ended up in the ER. And they kind of checked me all out, and they said, well, you're just having a panic attack, and they sent me home. So I'm thinking, what's going on? What can be wrong with me? I've never heard of anything like this before. So I went to a party, for a promotion party for the deputy superintendent who was being promoted to a superintendent, and my wife was also getting promoted at the same time at the same facility. And in corrections, we like parties, and any excuse will work, so they had a big party for this promotion. And while I was there, there was another retired lieutenant there who I had a lot of respect for all through my career. And he was kind of these rough and tough guys, and was always in the middle of stuff, and seemed to be right out there in the forefront all the time, and I had a lot of respect for him. He was on the CERT team, I was on the CERT team. CERT team is Correctional Emergency Response Team. And so anyway, we're sitting there talking, and my wife was off someplace talking, and he said to me, so how you doing with retirement? Okay. So he leans over and says, having any dreams? And I said, my wife told you, didn't she? I know she told you. No, she didn't, but you are, aren't you? And he said, yeah, I am. He said, I have too. I still get them once in a while. He said, they'll go away after a while. That night I went home, and I slept like a baby. And the reason is because if this guy could have them, it was okay for me to have them. Now, they didn't go away. They came with a lot less frequency than they were before, but I still had them, and I was still having panic attacks. And it went on for years, and I talked to doctors about it. I was put on medication, and it was like this, nothing was really working. And then I started realizing, after talking to other correction officers, that they were having some issues too. But we're a macho bunch of people. And God forbid, we say we may have, some issues from what we did all these years. We can't say that we were scared. Oh, then that makes you less of a person. You scared? You can't be in that place and be scared. In fact, you tell me you're scared, it scares me. So we never talk about it, because we need everybody to be strong. And when we are in the middle of a bad situation, the last thing I want to think about is this guy next to me going to stay here? So we never talk about it. We repress it. And that starts the whole process. So anyway, one day I am friends with an assemblywoman, Janet Dupree. Been friends with her for years, long before she was an assemblywoman. And I stopped in and talked to her. She's on the corrections committee. And we just started talking one day. And I told her about my issues, and we talked about them before. And she said, I got somebody I want you to meet. She said, there's a doctor or a professor at Plattsburgh State. And she gets into all this stuff, he said, traumatic brain injury groups and stuff like that. Maybe she'd be interested. So I'm going to contact her, talk to her, and maybe we can set something up. Well, a couple of days later, she called me up and said, yeah, when can you meet? He gave us dates, we got them. I went and met her over at Plattsburgh State, told her my story. Dr. Jeannie Ryan is Terry Ryan's wife, by the way. That's kind of how we got involved in the group. And anyway, we started this group. We called it, originally, Retired Correction Officers Support Group. But on our first meeting, we had actually, I was kind of impressed. We'd done some information in the newspaper, and we got a few people in, and I was happy with that. Jeff Ray here, who will be presenting now right after me, was one of them. Been there ever since and become a tremendous asset to the group. And we got other people in, and we soon found out, we met some guys that came in and actually opened up and just got to our hearts, actually. I mean, and they were so happy that there was a group getting started, and they were relieved to know that they weren't alone. And you could see the difference in their faces when they walked out the door. But we felt like we had to get more people, and we knew that the problem was this support thing and the macho energy. So we came up with the new name. Our goal, well, actually, is to advocate, educate, and support retired correction officers and corrections in general. Advocate by trying to get the word out to people that, number one, we're not the thugs, uneducated, brutal people that work inside the walls of a prison and really couldn't find nothing better to do, so that's what we became. And we want to educate, we want to educate everybody, as many people as we can get to listen to us, about what officers go through in a prison and the help they need afterwards. And educate the retired correction officers or correction workers so that they know that what they're going through, they're not alone. And that a lot of people go through the same thing. And then certainly to help support them. You know, prisons are like a cemetery. You drive by them, you see them, but you don't want to really be in them. And that's part of what our problem is because I'm sure you've all driven by a prison, you see it, and whoa, wow, especially Clinton, right? You drive by Clinton, that big walls, it's actually the curb in the street, right there on the street. And you drive by and you see those wall towers, gun posts, whatever you want to call them, and it's impressive. And then by the time you get up the mountain, heading toward Line Mountain or head toward Plattsburgh, you're on to something else, and that's the last you think of it. Inside the width of that wall, a lot of stuff is going on. Stuff you never hear about. That's what we want to talk about. Most people get their opinions of what prisons are really like by seeing movies, television shows, or what they read in the media. None of which I think is at all accurate. It drives me crazy. I cannot watch a prison movie. First of all, what do the officers always portray in those movies? A bunch of thugs carrying a stick, beating people down. That's what you see, and that's what our image is. Not even close to what it's like in there. The news media doesn't help us any. We have all kinds of issues with news media. If you talk to a correction officer very long and you start to bring up the news media, they're going to tell you that they don't really like the news media because we get portrayed in very bad light by all the news media. When have you ever seen a movie about the life and times of a correction officer? You ever seen one? Seen a lot of movies about inmates. You never see a movie about a correction officer. And it wouldn't be a boring movie, especially if you ever worked at Clinton, Attica, Auburn, the max jails. I'm not putting down the mediums. They have issues also. But you work inside one of those walled places for any amount of time, you've got a lot of stories to tell. I've got a lot of stories to tell. Jeff has got a lot of stories to tell. We can go on all day with our stories. In fact, I've warned them to kind of give me the cutoff because I can go on and on. So anyhow, one of the things you hear, the myths you hear from people, and I've heard, people have said, well, inmates, what's the problem with you guys? They're locked in cells all day long. You walk up and down galleries, you look at them, you have some guy on a catwalk with a rifle or a shotgun and gas or whatever. What's the big deal? I mean, come on, really? Well, let me tell you something. Inmates are out of their cells more. Most of them are out of their cells more in a 24-hour period than they are in. There are inmates that work in mess halls, other places, that are out of their cells by 5:30 in the morning, going to work. And their schedule, whatever it may be, will allow them to sometimes be out until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. Then they're back in their cell. Now there are a few times during the day that they have to go back in. We have to take account, make sure we've got them all. But it's only for short periods of time. So they're not in cells a lot. But there are a couple of reasons why some inmates are in their cells a lot. Because what we call keep lock inmates. Inmates that are keep locked are inmates who have violated prison rules. They go to a hearing. They get fair hearing. It's recorded. There's 3 levels. Tier 1, which is minor, being held by a sergeant. Tier 2, which is held by, and it's a little more formal, held by a lieutenant. My last job before I retired was a disciplinary hearing officer. And I have tier 2 hearings all day long. And tier 3, being the worst, are held by either a commissioner's hearing officer or somebody from the executive team will hold. And John, I think you've done tier 3 hearings. And there are a lot more, and sometimes for a lot worse violations, which include penal code violations. When there's a homicide in jail or serious assault, it goes to a tier 3, and those individuals can be held in segregation, which is what you hear referred to in movies as the box, the hole, the bing, whatever it is. That's the segregation. Those guys can be locked up. I've seen sentences for 5 years. Now, a tier 2, 30 days keep lock is like the max. You can take yard, rent, commissary. But segregation, in a longer period of time, they get 1 hour of rec a day. Keep locked inmates get 1 hour of rec a day. Which at Clinton, for one period of time, we had so many inmates in keep lock that we had to actually devote a whole shift of officers almost to taking those guys out to recreation. We had so many incidents getting them in and getting them out while they were in rec that we had to build cages to put inmates in the yard. We had to separate inmate, we call them dog cages or dog runs because that's what they resemble. We had 5-man, 2-man, whatever, and we'd have to get them out there. If a fight started in one of those cages while they were out there, the officer's orders were, you don't open that door up until we get enough help to go in there and get them. That created, every day, if you were a watch commander on a day shift like I was during that time, a thing called UIs, unusual incidents, or a use of force, or both. And that's, UIs are anything that are out of the ordinary, unusual incidents, assaults, insurrections, attempted escapes, homicides. There's a whole list of things that are called UIs, which requires the watch commander to call Albany within minutes of them happening and letting them know at the command center down there what's going on. And God forbid you should be late on a call. So you got a lot of stuff going on when you got one of these UIs. But that caused a lot of problems for us and created a lot of stories that I can tell you. But other than that, a regular weekday, inmates go to the mess hall in the morning. At Clinton, there's 2 mess halls. There's a kitchen, mess halls on either side. And they run in, they eat their breakfast, and then they go to work assignments, schools, programs. We have tailor shops, we call it. They're tailor garment shops, where they make inmate clothing for all of the state of New York. Officers' uniforms. Now we have to do a lot of frisking in that shop because they're making the uniforms we wear. And we don't want some inmate walking out the front gate with a uniform on. So there's a lot of security in that area. Inmates that have come to prison, they don't have a GED or high school, have to go to schools. There's other programs, there's AA, there's all kinds of counseling programs. Inmates are all over the jail, all over the place, all day long. They're either escorted in groups by a correction officer, they're sent on a pass that a correction officer makes out from one point to another, which is received at the other point, signed off when they're done, goes back. Or they're escorted one-on-one by correction officers. Virtually a prison is really a little city. Really a little city. There's like, I don't know what the count of Clinton is now, but between 2,500 and 3,000 inmates. And most of them are out during the daytime hours. So there's a lot going on, and there's a potential for a lot of problems. What are correction officers' duties? When you talk about a correction officer, you think, a correction officer keeps inmates inside the jail. Correction officer's title is actually a combination of a lot of other things. First and foremost is, yes, they're a law enforcement officer. They're the police of the inside that jail. They are peace officers. And that's their main job, to keep the peace in the jail. And sometimes we have some difficulties doing that. The other thing is a safety officer. You go around, you see walking down the gallery, an inmate has made his homemade lampshade made out of paper. Well, that's not a good thing. So that is a safety issue. You have them take it down, which sometimes results in that misbehavior report that ends up with a keep on. He's a fireman. Now, you might think, how does a place made out of steel and concrete burn? Well, let me tell you, they burn. You get a cell fire in a cell block that's got 300 inmates in it, you better start thinking about evacuating that block from the top down immediately. And that's a big issue. You got to get as much help there as you can, because war started. I was involved as a sergeant in a cell fire that happened in the block, and I responded to it. And I actually was helping put the fire out. We do maintenance work, so it's got a correction officer there with him. So he's a work crew supervisor. He's a mailman, believe it or not. You know, inmates get a lot of mail. Usually at night, on the afternoon shift, if you work in the cell block, you hand out mail. They're advisors. They're advising inmates on stuff all the time. It just continues. How you should do this, where you should write to get this out. It's continuing. And the one thing we have to be is perfectionists. I know that's hard to believe. But the problem is we're not allowed, in some instances, to make mistakes. Especially when it comes to a violent incident and the use of force. Like, let's say you're walking down a cell block and an inmate calls you over, and you walk over to him, and as you get about 5 feet away from him, he takes a cup or a can and throws a substance at you. You know what the substance is? I have to tell you, it's not pretty. Now, what's your natural human instinct to do at that time? Honestly. Beat him. But if that inmate goes, what do you do? Well, if you cross the line and beat him, guess what happens to you? You're brought up on charges, and you're probably going to get locked out of the jail, and then you're probably going to get fired. That's what you got to be able to do. That's when you have to be a perfectionist. What is it really like to be a correction officer? Well, you're outnumbered all the time. I ran a group of inmates out of a yard as an officer, and I was reminded of this story at one of our last meetings. 125 all by myself. It isn't normal. But they didn't have enough officers to run inmates out of the yard, so they said, go ahead, take them back to the east side of the jail, which went around this long corridor, and there's a corner that's called Dead Man's Curve. They called it that for a reason. I got around Dead Man's Curve, and as I came around, I saw an inmate swinging a bag over his head. Caught my attention right away. And hit another inmate who was now on the ground, profusely bleeding from the head. I've got 125 inmates, nobody around me. We didn't have radios in those days, so I had nobody to call for help. I get on this guy, I grab him, and I see the bag. It's got like a brick and stone in it. I pin him up against the wall. I grabbed the bag because I figured I was going to wear it next. Put a death grip on it. Hollered to inmates to go get me help, which they did. And soon help got there. The inmate who was on the ground ended up at CVPH, had serious head injury. When it went to court, the inmate in court thanked me for saving his life. Now, those kind of things go on all the time. And you know, that's not an unusual thing, except for the fact that I ran 125 inmates. There's always you're always hyper vigilant. You're always right on edge, waiting for something to happen. It may be calm, nothing's going on, but in your mind, you're waiting, because it's only a matter of time before your radio goes off, which they carry now, and it says level 1 or level 2. Those are different responses that you get at a certain location in the facility, and officers who are assigned to respond all start running to that location. So you're always waiting for that. When you hear that tone go off, it immediately gets everybody's attention. There's always, like I said, that continual threat for riots, violence, and sudden involvement in a hostile action. And that every day, from the time you walk in the front gate till you walk out. And like I said before, you never, ever want to show fear. First of all, because your officers will pick up on it. inmates will too. And they will use that to get to you any way you can. And it's a hard hole to dig, a hard time digging yourself out of that hole once you get into it. The best weapon is the ability to communicate. If you've got the ability to stop something, it isn't already gone crazy, but about to, and you can talk it out, talk it down, that's the best thing you can do. And so you gotta learn how to communicate real well. Humor. Humor is something we use all day, every day. I mean, there was a story told to us at one of our meetings where there was an incident. It was at noontime, and officers were eating back in the cell block, and the incident, the tone went off, and the officers responded, and there was a big fight going on in the corridor, and officers are using force and getting everybody separated, and these two officers from that block where they were just eating their lunch had got both an inmate up against the wall holding them, and the one officer says to the other, because the guy back in the block that knew liked to eat a lot, the other officer, said, I bet that SOB's eating our lunch right now. And you know, I mean, it's not a real funny story, but that's kind of the way the day goes, and it's some of it off color, let's face it. If you ever saw the show Rescue Me, about firemen in New York City, if you ever saw that show, that's a lot of the humor that they had, a lot how we are. But anyhow, humor gets you through the day. Stress. When I first started at Greenhaven, we had this great big sergeant. He was the poster boy for the Marine Corps, I thought. Told us, when you leave here at the end of the day, you leave the job at the front gate. Well, you know what? I tried to. There's no instant barrier there where you could leave, nothing to put it, nowhere to put it. You can't leave it at the front gate. It goes home with you every single day. And then this is de-stressing. How do we do it? Well, I had, on my way home, was about 15 miles to Plattsburgh every day, and I kind of used that time to get myself down. Actually, sometimes I got myself too far down. I got to an intersection that had a stoplight and a left turn lane that I had to take. I stopped, 2 cars in front of me, and a short time later I woke up. That's right, woke up, the cars in front of me were gone and cars were streaming by me. I fell asleep at a stoplight with my foot on the brake. I don't know how long I was there, but I hope it wasn't very long. Some guys get rid of their stress by doing, if you wanted a house built, you ask a correction officer and we've got every trade you can imagine. They can build you a house from the excavation right to the end in lawn care. We've got guys that do that. They work crazy hours, but it's good because they get rid of that stress. Then there's other people who choose some bad ways of de-stressing. There's always a bar somewhere close to a correctional facility, and they choose to use that method to de-stress, and that leads to bigger and more problems. And I got to admit here that I got into that routine for a while, and I was divorced at the time. But then I met my wife Kathy, who I say pulled me out of the ashes of hell, that's what I was heading for, and got me straightened up, and I got out of that bad habit. It's not a good place to be. And then some people choose the worst thing to do. And they just put a gun up to their head and end it up. And I've seen too many friends, too many guys I work with do that. Why do we do the job? Well, I did it because when I first heard about it from a friend of mine that went to be a correction officer, he showed me his first paycheck and go, wow, that's a lot more than I made. Then he told me about his benefits, and he said, you do this for 25 years, and you get to retire at half pay. Then took the test, July 9th, 1970, started as a correction officer at Greenhaven Correctional Facility, maximum security. That changed. And as time went on, you found out why you do the job. You do it for each other. Because when you're standing in the North Yard at Clinton, and you've got 800 inmates, 900 inmates out there, and the game is on, I'm not doing the job for the state of New York. I'm not doing it for the public. I'm doing it for the guy standing next to me. And so that we can all walk out that gate at the end of the day. That's who you do the job for. And that's what the retirement never comes to mind, your paycheck never comes to mind, believe me. And the benefits never come to mind. It's those people standing there with you, getting them all out of that place whenever your shift is gonna end that day. That's why we do the job. Public perception of what we do, I've already talked about that. They think we're a bunch of thugs or wannabes, couldn't become a state trooper or a cop. So you did the next best thing, became a correction officer. And you're nothing but an ignorant, brutal beast, and people just have that opinion of you. And it adds to one more level of stress to those of us who know better. At this point in time, I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Jeff Ray, and he'll get into some more details of being a correctional